Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. If you are not listening to Wes and Blake Silverman on the Pin Down over on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel, you absolutely should be. And if you are not reading Omari Sankofa II on the Detroit Free Press, you absolutely should be. Had a fun article today about the unks on the team with Tobias and Tim and Malik. I don't know, maybe Malik's not an unk yet. We'll have to get into
actually, it wasn't in the story, but I asked Duran if Bees qualifies. He said no, he's more like big bro territory.
Oh, okay. All right. So Bees isn't an unk yet. Got it. Okay. I don't always know what the age cutoff is with that, but make sure you're reading his stuff. Also, I have my stuff over on the Motor City Hoops Substack. I've started doing video breakdowns. So over there, you can see what Cade Cunningham has been doing in the ball screen. I did a recent one where I watched the last 100 Malik Beasley three-point makes and kind of
11 minutes, an 11-minute three-point breakdown for Malik Beasley. Sorry to cut you off, Bryce.
No, I appreciate it.
Bryce has been doing great work for the Patreon. Like, I get the emails every time he posts, and I always read them. And he's doing great work over there. And again, I don't know who else has an 11-minute video of what Malik Beasley's been doing as a shooter, which of course he's having this historic year. So had to shout that out. 11 minutes. Like how long did that take to put together?
It's honestly not as time consuming as people might think.
Okay.
I have synergy access, so I just clicked on his 3-point makes for the year, watched through them, and I kind of already had an idea what the themes were going to be.
Yeah.
But then it's easy to clip them out in Synergy's editor. And then I've gotten pretty good with iMovie, so I can make some mistakes whenever I'm recording and all of that, and then get it out. But yeah, I thought it ended up pretty good. I was excited to get that out to people where they could see, like, these are the things, transition that Malik's getting 3-point makes in, and his chemistry with Isaiah Stewart with off-ball screens, his chemistry with Jalen Duren in DHOs and off-ball relocation, and how Dennis Schroeder was creating stuff. So a lot of stuff, great stuff out there. Obviously more than just me, O2, and Wes. Lots of people putting out great Piston content. And Omari, right now, the Pistons are putting a great quality basketball team on the court. They're coming off that loss to the Nuggets, and I was really interested to see how they would respond because they had 2 quote-unquote easy games coming up, and they essentially took care of business the exact way you would think a good team would take care of business.
Yeah, I mean, they came out and threw the first punch. Utah kind of looked like the Pistons last year, the way that they just kept turning the ball.
I thought that as I was watching. I try not to say it too much.
Yeah. But I'm looking, I'm like, man, 10 turnovers and 10 personal fouls in the first quarter. I got deja vu for sure from last year. But again, and you said a lot, Bryce, but when you're a good team, you have to take care of games like last night. And Utah obviously came into the LCA a couple months ago and probably one of the few bad losses they've had, like, honestly, this season. There haven't been too many of them. But, I mean, they pretty much led by 10 after, like, the 7-minute mark of the first and probably earlier than that. And, I mean, it wasn't even close at all. So they had a couple of those games. Almost closed out against Brooklyn in the same way. They kind of slipped in the third quarter a little bit. Might have got down to 8. But, again, they're taking care of those types of teams. And it's at the point now to where, like, at what point do you start having the next conversation of, like, okay, they're taking care of the bad teams or beating the good teams? Like, what's the cutoff point for them, right?
Yeah. So Derek Brown says, what up, Bryce and O2?
Yeah, what's up?
Sharon Dalton, I had them winning 25 to 30 games this season, 35 tops if certain things went their way, but 35 wins with 20 games to go is insane. Yeah. I agree. I mean, to me, I think that's where I'm at. Like, they are going to have an interesting stretch coming down in these last 20 games. Like, there are a couple games against the Wizards, which are games they have to go win. But this next 3-game stretch on the road trip at the Clippers, at the Warriors, and at the Blazers, and the Blazers are playing really, really good basketball right now. If the Clippers are healthy, the Warriors have Jimmy Butler, and with the way the Blazers are playing, that's a really tough 3-game stretch on the road. So I think these little tests will continue to happen, And then as you really get into it, you have an OKC game, you have a Miami game that could be important depending on where the standings are, but that's the closest team to them in terms of behind them right now. You finish the season with the Bucks. Now there are some other games in there, right? Like the Mavericks, I assume, are going to mail it in after the news they got today. Super unfortunate
Yeah,
news for them. But
seriously.
a team like the Pelicans, what are they going to do down the stretch? Are they going to, they're going to keep playing Zion and figuring things out, or are you going to catch them on a night where they don't? So my point is there's a lot of wins on the schedule still, but there's also going to be some fascinating games. And I'm excited if they really get down the stretch and this stuff is still close, you could get a Knicks, Bucks to end the season, Omari. And I think that would be really cool if like you're jockeying for a position right there. The Knicks may be out in front enough, but I mean, how awesome would back-to-back Bucks games be to end the regular season where it's like, hey, if Detroit goes and wins both of these, they actually jump to the the 4 seed or something like that, right? Like that stuff is just as exciting as the playoff series we're going to get.
Yeah, and you talk about like measuring stick games, right? And I think win or loss, you're going to get a very good idea of just how close this Pistons team is before the end of the season. I mean, not just back-to-back games against the Bucks to close out, which realistically are probably resting one of Giannis or
sure, they could
Damian Lillard by then. So I'd be curious to see, like, they may just need Brook Lopez. You never know. Well, they would be resting Brook for sure. I mean, he's probably the oldest guy on the team. But
what if they're only a game difference, right? Like,
yeah,
what if the Bucks are at 4, the Pistons are at 6, and there's still this gap that we have today? They might not be able to rest those guys because it's the difference between being the 4 seed and having home court advantage to being the 6 seed and going on the road to the Knicks. So
yeah.
To your point, they might be resting, or it could be, as Aruna says here, could be the start of a 9-game series between the two teams.
No, it could. And you look at these last 7-8 games, they have the Cavs in there. They have the Thunder. They actually played the Thunder twice. Just in the next, 5 to 6 weeks, which, I mean, if you want a matchup game, that's it right there, right? I saw their plus minus for the season, and they're above, I think they're above the 16-17 Warriors, which is just like, man. So, no, I mean, a lot of measuring stick games coming up, especially starting, I think, tomorrow with the Clippers. We're recording this on Tuesday, so whenever you hear this, tomorrow's referring to Wednesday, for those not listening live. But they took care of the Clippers at home, and I know Norm Powell and a couple other guys were out, but again, like you look at how they started their last West Coast swing, defeating Phoenix on the road, and then you go take care of business against LA and Sacramento. You can essentially do against LA what you did against the Clippers tomorrow, and add more padding to this run. They've won 10 of 11, so you're talking 11 to 12 at that point.
Yeah, I'm fascinated because I feel like Asar really took James Harden out of that game. Now, they didn't have Norm Powell. They didn't have Kawhi, which is a huge part of the Clippers offense. But, I'm excited to see what he can do with James Harden again because I thought he had him really frustrated. Before we really get into this stuff, I have a couple bones to pick with you, Omari. First, window seat on a plane is our complaint of the day for our O2 flying from poor Salt Lake City to LA while I walk home to my shingles blown off my house because the wind blew between 70 and 80 degrees today. And then secondly, we got to bring the Svi Hami debate back to the Pistons world whenever we're rolling on positive vibes. And we got to bring back Svi and Hami last night during the game.
All right. So for the first point, when I'm on the airplanes, I'm like a dog. I got to be able to look out the window. Like I got to see what's going on. And especially when you're going from Salt Lake City to like LA and you see the mountains and the ocean and all that. And not only that, the person behind me closed their window. And the person in front of me closed their window.
You couldn't even go through their windows, huh?
And I could, like, the window directly across, I couldn't see it just because of the way the two guys next to me were sitting. So I just felt like I was in, like, this tube for, like, I mean, like, it's fine. Like, first world problems. But I was waking up, like, I'm ready to see some mountains this morning. And I didn't get it. So, anyway, first world problems. To your second point, what was the second point?
Svi and Hami.
Yeah, Svi played the last night's game, and I had no clue he was in Utah. And I was just like, man, that was like 5 years ago that they traded, I think, Sevilla the second for Hami. And I remember the debates playing out during the pandemic of, just value fair or whatnot. And just so much has happened since then. It was just like a blast from the past to see Savit check into that game. I know he's bounced around a bit, but that's what prompted the tweet. There was a few people in the comments who were like, "Oh, but what about this or that?" And I'm like, "Look, we could go as far back as we need to, right? I've been watching the team for a while, but he checked in, so that's what prompted that tweet. Was just Savit and Javi,
No,
and
I
just some good
got
old
you.
fashioned reflection on the good old days, you know."
I will tell you, as I was watching that game last night and watching Cade go behind the back for a Duran dunk, these lob plays,
Yeah,
all of that, I'm like, remember a couple years ago when we were like, this team needs an influx of athleticism?
yeah,
And it really, like, I'm not trying to throw shade at this draft, but it was the Killian, Sadiq, Isaiah Stewart draft. And it was like, okay, even if those guys were good, none of those guys would be considered like uber athletes. And then all of a sudden you change that, not the next year, but then after that, think about the drafts after Cade gets drafted, and you get J.I., who obviously not playing right now, but J.D., who's right in the middle of top 3 in the NBA in dunks or something like
yeah.
that. And then you bring in Asar, who's like top 20, even though he hasn't played. Like, I realized the other day doing all NBA defense, he's not eligible for postseason awards. Like, I think Asar would be all defense candidate. I mean, maybe not for some people. I don't know how. Sometimes I don't know if the voters get into the nuances enough.
He'll
He's
be on the
not.
radar, though. I think him and
I
his brother got Defensive Player of the Month nominations for February,
yeah.
and Stu, which just shows that people are starting to tap in and kind of
That's
realize
true.
that.
That's true. They are. And their defensive rating is high enough that, like, I think people don't even consider players until you see that defensive rating get to a certain point. I think Amin is definitely going to make all defense. Asar's just not going to get to 65 games this year because he missed so many
Yeah,
to start. And then, of course, you bring in Ron Holland as well. And then, listen, I don't know what happened to Tim Hardaway Jr. and Malik Beasley, but talk about the good old days and turning back the clock. Those dudes all of a sudden are bouncy as heck. Like, what is going on with these guys? It's
yeah,
incredible. We're at the end of the season, and they look healthier and more bouncy than ever.
yeah. Malik Beasley catching an alley oop from Dennis Schroeder last night. Like
Yo,
that's
he
got to be the
made
shortest alley oop of the season.
it made me mad because I just put out the video where I highlighted how Malik in transition, he just runs to the corner. He doesn't run to the rim because he knows he's not going to get lobs. I put it in my notes as well. And then like 2 possessions later, here's Malik catching a lob. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm an idiot. Like he's out there just getting these lob finishes just like Duran.
It's funny because I feel like there is Dennis Schroeder's like a veteran point guard, so you never sense anything. But I just feel like there was the slightest little bit of like, is he really about to go to the rim? Okay, and he just went for it, right? Like there was just like that tiny little bit of unspokenness, like okay, Bees has something to prove tonight, and that wasn't even his first dunk. Like I don't know if he dunked this. He might have had 2 dunks this season before last night, so clearly he has
Yeah,
something to prove.
he does. All right, let's get into it a little bit. Let's just talk about this stretch. So you mentioned some of the numbers earlier. Since the last time we recorded, they were 3-1. What's the momentum? What's the carrying force? I was shameless, like plug here. I hopped on with KOC, Kevin O'Connor again the other day, and he kind of asked me this question. I'm like, Cade's always the cop out answer, so I'm going to go in a different direction. What is your answer if I tell you, like, hey, you can't say Cade Cunningham? What do you think is the next driving force behind kind of specifically what we've seen here recently?
The defense for sure.
Yeah.
And I
Yep.
think a lot of that. I mean, Asar's brought it all season. Isaiah Stewart's brought it all season. I think they've had great effort all season, but I think Duran being more of a force on that end, and not just the timing with the blocks, but the Pistons are just trying to beat teams up, right? Like they're playing physical basketball, and I think they're trying to play as physical as the refs will allow them to. And you look at the buy-in on defense across the board. Ever since the start, Asar has been the starting lineup. They've had a new element there with him just bouncing all over the floor and probably cutting off 3 or 4 fast breaks a night just from teleporting from one end to the other. So their defense drives a lot, and I think there's been a lot of nights where, you may have a stretch where you can't score for, 4 or 5 minutes with Cade out, or maybe Cade's just having an off night, but you come back in and you find some spark and you're only down, 8 or 9, like something you can manage, right? You're not seeing games slip away entirely like they did all the time last year. And that just starts with defense, right? They have a lot of guys, I think, individually and as a collective who have really taken it seriously, and they've gotten better as the years going on. So if we're not talking about Cade, I think defense is number one.
So I'll give you some numbers here, Omari. Since the first, oh, some shade. I love it. The original O says O2. What fountain of youth? Beasley is younger than you.
Yeah,
Okay.
he is younger than me. Speaking of my Unc story, like a couple people in the story commented, Omari, aren't you 30? Like, aren't you Unc? And I'm like, this is like, first of all, the story isn't about me, okay? The story is about Tobias Harris
I
and THJ. Second of all, yes, Beasley is younger than me, but he can still
love it.
find a fountain of youth. You can still, find a younger version of yourself. So
Pistons
there you
talk. I
go.
want to make sure you know, man. Like we are one, we support you and appreciate you. Also, I have your comments and questions starred. We will touch on them when we get to that. Real quick, Malik Beasley has 17 dunks this year, according to B-Ball Reference, which is the second most of his career in any season outside of his third year in the NBA when he had 45. That year, he was 11th and sixth man of the year. I have a feeling Malik Beasley will finish higher than 11th and sixth man of the year this season. Here's some stats for you, Omari, from the Pistons since this turn of the calendar. They are fifth, tied for fifth in the NBA in win percentage at 70%, 21 and 9 in those 30 games. Steals per game, they are third behind only the Clippers and the OKC Thunder. And blocks, they are sixth in the NBA. Real disruption. Defensive rating, number one in the NBA since January 1st through today. Unbelievable on the defensive end. This was my answer as well. Asar is the driving force of a lot of this. He is the ultimate disruptor, but I think there's some other guys we need to give some love to as well. And quite honestly, I want to start with Jalen Duren because I don't think he's the second best defender on this team, but Jalen Duren has gotten better on the defensive end. And a lot of it is the disruption. I still have qualms with his fundamentally sound, how he plays ball screen defense, getting his hips turned. He had a play last night, I don't know, maybe you disagree with me. They're up 18. Duren turns it over in the fourth quarter, up 18, 8 minutes to go, and he chases down Colin Sexton from behind and blocks the shot. I don't know that we see Jalen Duren do that in the first couple years of his career, and he's doing it on the road in March, up 18 in the fourth quarter, where he easily could have said, you know what, let him go get a layup. It'll be fine. His motor, his energy, whatever you want to say, it has vastly improved, and it's turned into real substantial disruption.
And he obliterated that layup too. Like you would have thought it was a playoff game with how much force he put into it. I think for Duren, it's part of it is just maturing, right? He came into the league at 18 years old, and he was a year young for his class. So like you're getting NBA reps at a time where the guys in your draft class are just now getting comfortable with college. So he was always somebody that I figured we're probably not going to really see him tap into that potential until you start to get around year 3, year 4. Just because it typically takes bigs a few years to get to that point. But I think with that, how many people have Duren had at his position who have ever threatened him for minutes? And I'm not saying he's doing this because he's being pushed for minutes, but when you have Isaiah Stewart at your position and Paul Reed at your position, and those guys are using every ounce of their ability to disrupt everything, right? Duren has to do the same thing. And I think having, guys on the roster who have really set that standard, I think for a young guy to have an example to follow, like what Stu's done this season is insane, right? Like Stu's using every centimeter of his wingspan to direct as many shots as possible. So I think that sets a standard. And I think for a guy who always had the ability like Duren, the more reps you get, and then you just combine that with people in front of him who are just getting it done, and that's going to rub off on you. And I think that's just that's why you need a good third center, right? You always have to be in your A game every single night because Paul Reed could come in and give you 15 good minutes whenever you need. So, I think that's just the knock-on effects of investing in that position and then during growing up as well.
So we get sending greetings from Holland, Michigan. Love it. Let's go Pistons, and happy about Ron Holland the second. We will talk about Ron Holland the second as well. I will say this to Matt. I appreciate your comments. So many people gave up early on these young players. I do think people, maybe some gave up on Duren. I don't know if that's true, but I will say I don't think it was unfair to expect more from him or to be critical of his play. because there were things that needed to improve. In the same way that Cade Cunningham is second team All NBA right now, and I will still be critical of his decision making at times. Like I put it in the Substack today, his decision making right now in the pick and roll with Duren has been a little off recently because people are tagging more and he's not hitting the skip pass to the weak side. To your point of what you said, Omari, I don't know if I brought it up on this podcast or not. Duren's had 3 coaches in 3 years. But in year 2, he had a vastly different experience than J.I. had. J.I. came in year 2, and what happened? He got benched for Killian Hayes. And right or wrong, we don't need to relive that. I'm sure it made J.I. go like, man, am I doing things right? Am I not? I don't know. J.D. now is looking at a guy that was drafted higher than him, coming off the bench and saying, well, shoot, I'm still in the starting lineup. I must be doing everything the right way. Why would I need to change anything? I'm still getting my starts. I'm still getting my minutes. J.I.'s the one that got benched. And I'm not making this a J.D.J.I. thing. I'm just saying I think it would be easy to look at that scenario and go, oh, I must be doing okay. The other thing I think JB has empowered all of the bigs to be more disruptive. Like in general, I think all of them, like I would think it's a defensive philosophy for this team right now, and I think that fits how Jalen Duren plays defense. I wonder if the first couple of years he was encouraged not to go try to contest everything and be more quote unquote solid or something.
Yeah, and that's something that, like, when you have so many coaches in such a short span of time, and they all have different directions what they want on defense, it takes time to settle in. So again, I think you just combine what I said earlier, and then you bring in JB and what he's done for the bigs and that stability. Not to mention just what JB just did, working like he worked with Jaren Jackson in Memphis, and now he's worked with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. So so he's familiar with young guys who kind of have those athletic gifts like Duren has. So just fitting into a mode, right? You put the right environment around him, and he's gotten a little bit older, and now it's starting to pay off for him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to like say anything about Monty Williams. Like that era is gone, and we're into a new one. But as Matt says, the JB to Monty change cannot be underestimated. I agree wholeheartedly. Again, I'm not going to sit here and I can just there's things that JB does almost every night that I'm like, man, this is really cool. This is awesome. This is stuff that we haven't seen recently for this team. And right now he's pushing all the right buttons with this team, and it's really, really cool to see. We're going to go to break. When we come, I want to say defense. O2, if you're cool with saying defense. I want to talk about some other dudes because there's a couple other names that I think deserve some credit, starting with Isaiah Stewart. We'll get into them right after this.
All right, we're back with segment 2. As I mentioned earlier, Asar Thompson and Isaiah Stewart received nominations for Defensive Player of the Month for February. Again, as we talked about earlier, Pistons have the #1 defense since New Year's, so you have to acknowledge that somehow. But to have 2 guys, neither of whom I think are averaging more than 25 minutes a game, be in a conversation for that. As we kind of segue into an Isaiah Stewart conversation here, that is big. Like Isaiah Stewart's not playing like a lot of minutes, but I don't know how many players have been more effective in his minutes than Isaiah Stewart has. So I think just from a recognition standpoint, like that says a lot. Like neither of these guys are like, playing 35 minutes a night like some of the other guys, but like within their minutes, like there's no question that, they've been elite on that end this season.
Yeah, Chuck brings up an interesting one. The tweet about Holland celebrating dunks and how fast he's running to get back on defense now. I think somebody tweeted about it, and then Holland quote tweeted and brought that up. Yeah, I think O2 is like a super sick nickname for Omari. Like I can't stop myself from using it. So I guess
I'm surprised it took this long for it to like come to light.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is, so sometimes I'll give nicknames to my students, like, and then they'll be like, I can start to realize they don't like it. And so I'll be like, hey, if you don't want me to call you that, just like, tell me, it's all good. So I'm waiting for you to send me the text, be like, Bryce, stop calling me O2. I don't want you to call me that. So
I have no issue with any of my nicknames because all my nicknames are like my name, so it's tough for me to be here. Like, no, don't call me O2. How dare you call me O2? Like, no, I like O2.
Listen, Stu is amazing, man. He's so good on the defensive end. To Detroit for life, 1,000 mentions. You can't move him. Like you can't. I've watched some guys play in the NBA that can really move defenders around, and Stu does not give ground. You may score over him. Maybe. You might. You got a chance, but you are not going to move him and get closer to the rim. He's just so solid in regards to that. We know he has switchability. We've talked about that since his rookie season, right? His ability to do that. And then the rim protection just gets better. And especially with him, it's not just the blocks, it is the rim contest. And it seems like he always has a way of forcing misses. I don't think it's like a lucky thing because it's continued to happen. So I think his defense cannot be overstated in the value that brings. And what I also want to highlight, because Asar and Duran and Stu are the guys that really, it's driving their offense, Omari. It truly is. I have the numbers here. The Pistons are 5th in pace since the start of the new year. And I think if you look over even more recent sample sizes, it's even higher. Like I think it was number 1 whenever I looked at something earlier in a smaller sample size. And it truly does come from jumping passing lanes, steals, deflections, blocks, and then they're getting out and going in transition.
And that's, again, like the energy aspect, right? And I think when you have one, like I think it just took them a while to finally collect enough athletes who can actually, impact passing lanes in that manner, but also guys who can really push the pace, right? I think it just took a while to acquire enough guys who can make an impact in that way. But you see the immediate effect of that too. And that's one thing they struggle with a lot. Again, last year, you turned the ball over so much, you could never generate any real momentum. On the flip side of that, when you're always playing in the passing lanes, when you're playing as physically as you possibly can, rejecting shots, just straight up ripping the ball from guys like Cade. I forget who it was last night, but he just sort of squared up like perfectly and he gets bumped a bit, ball comes loose, like just stuff like that. That's going to keep your offense moving. And this is like basic stuff, right? Like it's not like crazy stuff, but it's just stuff that wasn't happening for him last season. So like all that is tied in. Like from an effort standpoint, I think they realize, and I think JB has really hammered home that it's all connected. It's all the same thing, and you have to put in that work equally on both sides. So Asar being in the starting lineup, that's really helped. And then we talked about Duran, but all these guys are locked in because they understand that it's all connected.
Yeah, we probably didn't give Asar enough love, but I think everybody knows how good we think he is defensively, and I think we immediately said he's the driving force of all of this. West Pole Duran stock numbers per month: October 1.4, November 1.6, December 1.8, January 2.1, February 1.5. So his stocks actually went down in February. Obviously, he's had 2 games here in March that have got off to a good start with that. So it's not just like the stocks, it's just like the energy he's playing with and everything he does. So it really is it really is impressive. A couple other names I want to throw out. Dennis Schroeder, I think at the point of attack has been good. A guy I've been hard on O2 on the offensive end is Simone Fontecchio. But I think Simone Fontecchio really defends. Like, I think he does a really nice job, especially for, like, obviously he's playing against second unit guys, and that's probably part of why he's so successful. But I think he does a good job, and I think he deserves a shout out here as well whenever we're just talking about this overall defensive impact, because I think he brings a little bit of something to that second unit on that end.
Yeah, no, like he's a solid 6'8", and like there aren't too many matchups that are like bad matchups for him, quote unquote, unless he's getting matched up against like a center who can like actually do something with the ball. But otherwise, like he's feisty, he knows where he needs to be, and he's got good overall size. So he's not a negative. Like he comes in and he really competes. And I think for somebody who's playing 10 to 15 minutes, that's the most you can ask for. Like he's gotten some shots to fall in a few games too, but I think that's the reason why he's continued to play, is that he has set that tone defensively, if nothing else, just from a hustle standpoint.
Okay, I'm going to ask a very unfair question, but I'm going to go to the negative side. Of the
not only is it unfair, it's the negative. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, sorry. Who's the worst defensive player in the rotation individually?
Probably, like honestly, probably Bees, and that would just be like, he's 6'4", but like he's a smaller 6'4", and it's not like he doesn't care or anything. Like he plays with effort on that end, just like everybody else has. It's just sometimes you just don't have the physical tools to be like the greatest impact guy, and that's just the reality for him. Like it's not like a care thing. I don't think it's he's kind of built like J.I., but like not the same type of athlete. So.
I would love to get the comment. I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm actually trying to make a positive point in all seriousness. Omari, this summer, this used to be a tough, who is the Pistons' good defensive players, right? Remember
Yeah.
coming into the year, it's like how many of these guys are positive defensive players? So I think YouTube user brings up a good point. THJ, if he didn't take charges, I think I actually agree with that. I think Beasley's probably better all around, but THJ does draw more offensive fouls, but not just charges drawn, but he also has a way of doing it off the ball. I think it's probably those two guys. But to your point, they're probably negative defenders because they just don't stay in front as well. Although I thought Beasley had a pretty good night defensively last night.
Yeah.
But they're playing with extremely extreme effort, like very intense. And so I don't think it's like, oh my gosh, this is such a detriment. They're not going to hunt those guys. Well, we'll see in the playoffs, I guess. They're not going to hunt those guys like teams do Trae Young and stuff like that, right? I don't think anyway. We'll see. If I was a team, I would hunt Cade, not because I think Cade's a bad defender, because he's not, but I would just try to wear him out, right? Like if I was going to hunt somebody, it would probably be him to try to wear him out and try to get him in foul trouble if I can. It's just crazy that this team all of a sudden has an elite defender in Asar, another really good defender in Stu, and then some other guys that offer quality defense in a variety of ways, and nobody that you're just like, yep, that guy is an absolute traffic cone on that end of the floor. And yeah, YouTube user, we'll see in the playoffs, and music to your ears. I just say it so casually now. It's just like they're gonna play in the. Remember when we used to be like, I wonder what an episode will do after a playoff game. I wonder what content will be like whenever this. And now we're actually gonna find out here in a couple months.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. Honestly, I feel like with 20 games left, it hasn't even hit me that like we're in the home stretch. I have like a document where I keep ideas, and I've never had this many ideas for stories in March. Like this is usually like the most rough month of the year for like a story idea. Like season's over, you still got 6 weeks left. Very strong.
Let's do a mock draft. You know? Let's do a mock draft, Omari. Like we got nothing else to do.
5. Let's do it. You know, why not? And let's bring on like 8 different mock experts. It's fun, man.
We were always hunting for guests, right? Like it was like, okay, how can we talk about the exact same thing every week, but it not get repetitive? Okay, we'll bring on Keith Smith, and then we'll bring on Sam Vecini, and then love all of those guys, but the fact we can get on here and just talk for this amount of time because the team is good is crazy.
It's crazy. I probably mentioned it on the pod last week, but it didn't hit me until I walked into the arena before the Boston game. And they had already won 7 straight, kind of divided across the All-Star weekend. But that's when it hit me like, okay, this is like the biggest home game in years. And like, if they win this, then you start really having those conversations, right? So it's just weird. Like we've been in this space for like a week. They've been winning for a while, but it's really like the past week to where it's like, okay, I think we can trust this and this is legit and they could actually do something.
Yeah, it's so much fun. It really is. Like I enjoy it, like what we're able to break down. I think it's going to make the offseason awesome because like we're going to get a playoff series at least to see where this team is, who succeeds, who doesn't, who struggles, what happens. And then you go into an offseason and try to figure out, okay, like how do you take the next step? And there's going to be a lot of conversations there, and it's not going to be through the draft, right? Mm-hmm. Like maybe we talk about adding, replacing somebody with that second round pick, but it's not going to be that. And so it's a lot of fun. And I always chuckle listening to the national media talk about the Pistons. That is where I get an ego about this. I'm like, sometimes they say stuff. I'm like, you still haven't even watched them play. You have no idea what you're talking about still. Like, go watch a game and you'll actually know.
That's the paradox for fans is that they really appreciate when national media is tapping in. Like, obviously, that's a sign of where your team is at. But then they get frustrated with the national coverage. And it's like, well, that's how they cover everybody. It's always just more general cookie cutter stuff because they don't watch every team with the same with the same level as your local beat writers and podcasters and video breakdown people.
And they can't.
Bryce.
Yes. Listen to us for Pistons content. If you don't want to take my thoughts on the Atlanta Hawks, I understand. But Pistons, I feel pretty strongly that me and O2 are pretty good. Listen, it's so hard. Like I have to try to do it for game theory, and it stresses me out because it is hard to keep up. I don't blame them. It's just funny because they'll talk about Cade, and then they'll always just reference the young pieces, but they never really talk about what any of the young pieces do great or anything like that. And again, it's not their fault. I'm not trying to throw shade. It's just it's 30 teams. It's hard to be an expert, which I would feel like you and I are on the Pistons. It's hard to be an expert with, all 30 teams. We need to talk about Ron Holland a little bit. Wes brings that up. We're talking about defense, so let's start there. What have you thought about his defense, his energy, his offense, just, where his game is at right now?
I like his springiness on defense. I like how he's fast, break minded. I I feel like he has really good balance, and like even if he's not always the most positionally sound, I feel like sometimes he could just kind of make up for it just because he moves so well.
Yeah.
And like I've been seeing a lot of good stuff on that, and I still think he's been trying to make do with what he can in those minutes. Like I'd have to go back and check his minutes, but I feel like ever since Schroeder got into the rotation, he might be playing 2 or 3 less. But he's got all the tools. I think it's a reps thing with him, but especially on ball, it seems like he really has the tools to pester guys and kind of get into them. He seems to be like the type of defender that just wants to get into your head more a little bit, like he's got the physical tools, but I think he's like that mental type of defender as well, where the SAR is just like perfect technique on everything. So there's a bit of a contrast there, but long story short, there's a lot about Ron's defense that I've liked.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because SAR had like a clinic tape ball screen navigation on Colin Sexton last night. Sexton actually ended up scoring, like hit a sick, same foot, same hand floater.
Sexton is crazy, man.
Yo, man,
if he ever gets on a real playoff team, like, come on, he's a spark plug.
Yo, same page. I literally wrote it in my notes was this dude is a third guard on a good team. I think Colin Sexton is good. I don't know.
I like it. Like ever since he left Cleveland, like it's like I feel like Cleveland made the right decision, but
obviously, yeah.
But there's some team that could just plug him in as a perfect third guard, and he could heat up and win you a playoff game. Like I really believe that.
I think it's going to happen next year. He's finally on an expiring. I think maybe he was making a little bit too much than what people wanted, but for 1 year, he's still going to be under 20. He's going to be over the non-tax MLE, but not crazy. I think he'll end up on there. But yeah, anyway, Asar navigated the initial ball screen on that action perfectly. Yeah. It was crazy. So real quick, I looked it up over his last 8 games, which I don't know that that's fully since the deadline. It may be a little bit after, but 16 and a half minutes per game for Holland, averaging 6 points, 55% from the field, 75% from the line, 2.5. The numbers aren't going to be crazy. The interesting thing is he had a 4-game stretch where he hit a 3 in every game, had hit 2 in a couple over the 10-game stretch before that. He hasn't hit
one recently.
He has not hit one in his last 9 games. Okay. Hasn't taken one in 3 of his last 5. This is where I'm really interested to see in the playoffs is, and I see people asking in the comments, is he in the playoff rotation? I asked this in the Substack chat the other day, so that's another advantage, guys. If you want to subscribe to the Substack, completely free. There's a chat over there. I'll throw questions out every once in a while. I was like, do we think he stays in the rotation? I want him to be because I want to evaluate him, but can you play that many non-shooters in the playoffs when the other team's scheme and scout is a little bit more locked in?
And that's what's interesting is because you always notice him out there, right? I think when you're a wing that can't shoot, but you're always noticeable when you're on the floor, like that shows that you're at least doing enough to justify it, right? And he probably would have been out the rotation a long time ago had he not been. But yeah, in the playoffs, I think all that stuff gets accentuated. I think that's what happened to Cleveland last year. They had some injuries, but I also just think a team with that type of spacing issues will be inherently limited, until one of those guys learns to shoot. And what do you know? Mobley's shooting the 3 pretty well this year, and they're taking a completely different. He's done a lot of other stuff to get better. He's way stronger. His handle's better, but him and Jared Allen, being able to share, not share space offensively. I mean, helps a lot as well. But yeah, with Ron being a rookie, being a non-shooter, I think it would get a lot harder, especially with Asar kind of already occupies that role. I don't know if you have room for 2 guys like that. If you're playing Tobias 37 minutes, you're playing, I would assume at that point, all your older guys or minutes probably go way up as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested. I don't think it's so much hey, we don't want to play this guy. It's like we're gonna bump the minutes of some other guys. So let's look at minutes right now for this team. Cade's at 35. You're probably not bumping that a lot, but you might, right? So you have that. Tobias is at 32. Duran's at 26. Asar's at 20. Asar's probably the number, right? Like
And that's
assuming
it. Yeah.
there's like that's the interesting thing. Yeah. So Chuck says Asar might get up to 35 in the playoffs too, as his stamina is rounding into shape. That would be a huge jump, right? If even if he's playing 31, that's 10 minutes that you have to take away from somebody else. So that would be interesting to kind of see. I will say, I think the thing I really like from Holland is you see the flashes of finishing in transition, even in the half court. Like even last night when that game was out of hand and they subbed out, he had a really nice attack of the basket. He's done it in like the real minutes as well. I think his passing has been pretty good for a guy who some really questioned. I even questioned his decision making a little bit. He's been very unselfish in general, but I think his just general passing reads have been even better than I thought they would be as a rookie. So I'm still very encouraged by Ron Holland. I have no negative takeaways from this rookie year, especially considering he's playing for a team that is 35-27, has a positive net rating, and is 6th in the Eastern Conference. Like, this is a good basketball team that he's finding a way to get minutes and make a positive impact on.
Yeah, I have a feeling Ron's going to be one of those guys who just adds something every single summer until you look up in 5 years and it's like, oh man, like this dude's become a really great player. And he's always fun to watch, even if he only plays like 15 minutes. I feel like he always has at least one play in there where you see the upside and why he appealed to the Pistons at that 5 spot.
All right, let's go to break. We have some questions. Let's start off with the questions, and then we will like look ahead. Wes put some numbers and some stuff together in the outline. So let's go to the questions when we first come back, and then we'll end the episode with some of that. We'll get into your questions right after this.
All right, we are back with segment 3, and we're going to get into a few questions here. So feel free to drop a question if you have one. First, from Derek Brown, where will Simone be in a rotation during the playoffs? So that's kind of along the same topic we were on.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's like the same deal, right? If Asar goes up to like 35 minutes, he's averaging 21 right now. Like that's probably coming from Ron and Tech, realistically. I think Simone is a great guy to have in the playoffs, but like they're pretty strong at the wing. Like I don't know if we're going 5 deep in wings in the playoffs the way you are during the regular season. So
yeah, I mean, my thought is let's assume the same starting 5. They didn't trade for Schroeder not to play him. Isaiah Stewart is obviously going to play, and Beasley is obviously going to play. So that's your 8. My guess is they would put in Fontecchio before Holland if they wanted to go to 9. And I would still guess throughout a series, you're going to have to go to 9 multiple times. Even like I could see his minutes going from 17 to 10 or something like that. This is an interesting question from Aruna. I need to text my guy, Bob Schmidt, that does the Cleveland Cavs pod, and ask him if the minutes did shrink, if the rotation did shrink in the playoffs. Injury, and obviously, like Jaden Ivey's an interesting, caveat in all of this as well. I'm not putting him in play until we know more. Here's another question from Cloudy. Do you guys think they should switch to Beasley starting in the playoffs? My quick and easy answer, Cloudy, I understand the idea. I would say no. I think a big part of the Pistons' success this year is the continuity of the rotations of the lineups, where JB's kept it as consistent as possible outside of injuries forcing his hand.
Yeah, I would think they probably keep Bees in that off the bench role, unless you just have a favorable matchup where you can play a little bit smaller. Which, given how the East is set up, I don't know what matchup that would be. Maybe you get crushed spacing wise with a star and you switch it up, but otherwise, like
maybe
I like Bees coming off the bench.
Maybe you'd want to go small against Indiana just to try something different, but like.
That's the only team, though, probably.
Siakam will bully you if you go too small. Like, I don't think you could go too crazy. Yeah, it'd be interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah, I would guess he probably stays where he's at. But I would be curious to see that as well.
Okay, I saw another one here. Does Stu get more minutes in the playoffs? This is from Chuck.
I think that's also matchup dependent, right?
Yeah,
because there may be a matchup where you may try playing him at the 4 a bit. If you're getting bullied a little. Like I don't know what team that would be though. With like once upon a time that would have been New York. That's not New York now. Maybe Milwaukee.
New York might do it if with Mitch Rob back, right? So like if
Oh, Miss Robin Cat, yeah,
yeah, if they went there, I think the idea of Tobias is though, like you still feel like you're okay.
yeah,
Um, yeah, Milwaukee would be the interesting one because Stu's to me by far the best matchup for Giannis.
yeah,
And they've tried all sorts of different things. Cleveland is another interesting one, right? Like you could
yeah.
put Stu on Mobley. I think the thing with Mobley is like Asar could also take that. So like this is where it gets fun. Like we get to talk about this, Omari, in terms of like these matchups and stuff like that. I got asked the other day, like, who did I think the best matchup for Detroit was of those three teams? I'll let you like I said I thought Milwaukee was probably the worst just because my kind of personal philosophy is if you have the best player in the series, I think your chances of winning is probably better. And I still think Giannis, as much as I love Cade, is the best player in that series. I think against Indiana, Cade is going to be the best player in that series.
Mm-hmm.
And against the Knicks, I think they match up interesting because the Knicks have nobody that can guard Cade Cunningham.
Yeah,
Nobody. And they have the perfect archetype of defender to guard Jalen Brunson in Asar Thompson. I think I've warmed up to, I want them to play the Knicks because I want to see if the bigs can guard Cat and I want to see if Cade can cook them for an entire series like we've seen. And I want to see if Asar can shut down Jalen Brunson for an entire series. So if I had to choose just who I wanted them to play, it would be New York.
yeah. I think New York's well, they've beat New York twice already, right? And I think some of that too is like I think Cade has truly proven himself to be unsolvable with one defender. And I think that's huge. Like he makes like Dyson Daniels is just that 6'7". He makes Dyson Daniels look like a smaller guard whenever they go up against each other, right? And Michael Bridges couldn't do anything with Cade. Like
Oh, no.
Um, like he's just like he's been matchup proof against certain teams. Well, against most teams, but New York being one of those teams, which New York like got those guys to, because of guys like Cade, right? Like we need to be able to match up against those bigger guards and wings. So New York is interesting. It's just Cat. Like I feel like Cat is the swing
Oh,
factor.
oh yeah. I'm not
And
saying they would win. I'm not saying
yeah,
that's the best matchup to win. I'm saying it's the matchup I want to see because I
but
think
you
you
want to
get
see, yeah,
the most data. Like to YouTube users' point, like maybe Josh Hart can guard Cade.
yeah,
OG is super big and physical. Maybe we find that that's something that Cade would struggle with in a
yeah,
series. So, and to your point, Cat, we know stretch bigs have
yeah.
hurt this team before.
Yeah, but on the other end, they hate Indiana. So if you
Yeah,
want a
Aruna.
series with just two teams who hate each other, and that's like a fun matchup too. Like they're both young teams. Indiana has a few guys that can throw at Cade defensively. Although, I feel like Nimhard probably does a like more of a
He does a
decent
really
job
good
on
job.
Cade than like
He
a lot
absolutely
of
does.
people. Like I would
Yeah.
give Nimhard that for sure. He's one of the better Cade defenders in the league. But Miles Turner like goes off against them. But you make the point about Cade being the best player in that series, and that's the equalizer, right? Like I
Yeah.
think matchups specifically, like Indiana wins a fair share of those. But if you're just leaning on the best player could carry you, then yeah, you might be able to go seven with Indy and maybe even beat them. So I go Indy just because that's probably the most beatable team of those, but also just the fact that they hate each other. I think that would be
Yeah.
fun. Like
It would be.
7 games of that would be insane. Like,
Hey man, it would be a blast. Matt,
yeah.
appreciate the super chat. Yeah,
Yes.
you sh-
Thank you.
you should have dropped a comment, but we've got some. If you want another one, we'll put it in here. But thank you very much for the super chat. We appreciate you a lot. Our guy Pistons Talk. What's up, fellas? Did you see Nick Wright putting Cade Cunningham as a top 10 player in the NBA? I saw this on Twitter earlier. I'll be honest, guys. Like I didn't watch the whole segment. I don't know. I don't even know what he was doing. Like I don't know why he was ranking players. All I will say is we did awards on Game Theory on Sunday. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. I had Cade Cunningham very much in my second team All NBA. I know that's not the same conversation because All NBA takes players out that are injured. But if he is second team All NBA, he's at least a top 20 player in the NBA right now, regardless of health or anything else, and maybe even higher. The one thing I'll say real quick, O2, I'm just waiting to see Cade do it in the playoffs.
Mhm.
I struggle a little bit putting him above some guys who we've seen put up big performances in the playoffs. As soon as we see Cade do it, I think it very much vaults him into this.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely top 20. I think he's at least top 15 if I had to sit here in the rank. And I actually haven't yet, just because I just haven't yet.
Yeah.
But like that's very much a conversation. At the very least, I would say we could probably just boot Paul George out, at least give
Oh man.
Cade Paul George's spot, if nothing else, right? Like, is he Paul George
Okay,
tier?
here's the question: who's had a better season for their team, Paul George or Tobias Harris?
No, but there you go. I mean, that's not even close.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen,
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if Tobias is better than Paul George, but the numbers are certainly close.
yeah.
And Tobias is doing exactly what, he was brought into Detroit to do. And Paul George just straight up isn't. So,
No,
um, yeah.
just
Okay,
give Cade
Matt.
Paul George a spot. That's what I say for the top 15 debate. Wherever you have Paul George, slide Cade in there, and then we can argue from there.
All right, so Pistons Talk says, do you think letting Point Duran and Point Asar has opened the transition game more? I will say yes to one of those and no to the other. I am good on grab and go Jalen. Listen, Jalen Duran has been really, really good. I'm trying to give all the flowers I can. I would really like him to stop going in the full court, but I'm all about him running offense in the half court too. I think you tweeted about this as well. Like it's a
I,
little bit of a mixed bag.
I've tweeted about the during fast breaks a few times because they are
Yeah.
a mixed bag. I just feel like he's had some great plays in transition, especially with Asar on the floor with him, because Asar is probably the only other guy on the team he could throw lobs to, right? And that's something he really wants to do. He's tried throwing a lob to Cade in the Atlanta game last week, and that did not go well. But but the thing with Duran is that I think in the grand scheme of a game that hasn't really been that costly.
No.
And it's fine for him to just gotta have those reps. It's like one of those things where it's like, is it ideal? No, but can we allow him to have live game reps when he's, just to do it a couple times a night, but he's already doing everything else? Like, I think you can live with it. And it has led to a couple fun plays, even if there's also a good chance like it might hit the backboard out of bounds too. So I think it's fine. I think it's fine. I kind of joke about it on Twitter, but like it's fine. It's not a big deal.
On the other side, I'm all in on Point Asar in the full
Yeah.
court. That man drives offense in the full. It's funny. I want Asar going in transition. I like what Duran's doing in the half court. And Duran's going to be huge. This is going to be a huge playoff because my guess is no matter who Detroit plays, they're going to put two on Cade, and Duran's going to have to make short roll decisions. And I feel like he's been doing a good job of it lately. Steven Suggs, Bryce, just watch your analysis on the Beasley on Substack. Thank you. Appreciate it. He's the textbook wing. Do you think other teams have their players watch film like that on B? So I don't know, Steven, if you're asking like to scout him or to replicate what he's doing, but I would like to think so. Like, I mean, if they're not, they should be. I would recommend, and probably the best compliments I've got about the Substack O2 is people who say like, hey, I've learned the game better watching these, or I had someone like, hey, I sent this to my friend that coaches high school basketball and he's showing it to his players. Or the coolest one was I had a dad like say he watches it with his kids and it helps them like kind of connect with the game on that level. I was like, well, I mean, this is amazing. This is awesome stuff. I would assume NBA teams do this though. Like, hey, watch the way Malik Beasley relocates here whenever there's this drive. Or as you're scouting the Pistons, you have to be showing that stuff or you're going to be completely lost off the ball and he's going to be getting wide open catch and shoot opportunities.
Yeah, like I think of course, all shooters work, on all that stuff, but a lot of that too is like sometimes you put the work in, but you also just need the right environment to really showcase that. I think B's coming in, him already kind of having like an affection for the city, and like he's just shot the three so well. Like it's just one of those things where the results just kind of justify themselves. Like you could take notes of what Beasley's doing, but that doesn't mean that your best shooter is going to slide in and knock down 42% of their threes, right? And Beasley hasn't done that till this season. Like only a handful of guys have ever had that type of season. So, yeah, like I'm sure that guys who are working on their shooting could use Bees as a model, but some of that also is just Bees standing in the perfect environment for him to even just have the freedom to take some really wild shots, right? And just showing that he could consistently knock them down. Again, like what he's doing is just like that's incredibly difficult. Like that's a skill where either you have it or you don't. And this season, he's showing that there is another tier that he could get to.
It makes it hard for me to believe he'd want to leave this environment, right?
Yeah.
Like it feels like he's in the perfect environment. I know money talks, but it just seems like he's so comfortable in his skin right now. He's empowered in the perfect way by this team and this organization, this coaching staff, that it's like, would you really want to chance it somewhere else? So Malik
Yeah.
Beasley, if you listen to the Pistons Pulse, this is my pitch to you. You don't want to go somewhere else and take a chance. This is the perfect environment for you to continue to do this well into your 30s when you're an unk and kind of O2's age right now since he's already older than you. Matt says, question with the super chat was if do the Pistons want to go far in the playoffs or not due to young players being up for contracts? Not sure how that would impact extension talks with JD and Asar. Yeah, I think it could be interesting, like what this would do with JD's contract. He goes into the playoffs and really struggles defensively. That could impact it. He goes in there and is a monster. And what if they make an Indiana run to like the conference finals or something? I think it could, because ultimately playoff data is important. And so, sure. I mean, to me, I think you still want to go win. The more data you can get, the more success, the more experiences for these guys, especially once you get into it. So I wouldn't want to say like, no, you want them to lose, but I think it definitely could impact contract.
Yeah, and I don't think like you want to go far in the playoffs regardless too. Like if your team's playing at that level, then like the money is what it is, and like if you have a roster of good players who are worth paying, like I still think an overpaid good player is fine. I've seen a lot more contract talk just with some extensions coming up, and we'll talk about it this offseason and next and the year after with Ron. But if they make a deep playoff run and now it's like, oh, you may have to pay some of these guys like more money, like that's still fine. Like I look at how Milwaukee has had like no flexibility every single year, and they've still found ways to, piece together what they have and and upgrade, right? I think creative front offices figure it out. Like this playoff run will impact conversations based on how guys play, but they have no bad money, so I wouldn't look at it like, oh, if they make a deep playoff run, like this may cost them more money down the road, and that's inherently bad. I think you allow things to happen as they go. If they play well in the playoffs, then that's cool, and then you figure out the rest of the stuff later.
Yeah, I mean, my thing with Duren is if they make a run to like what we're talking about here, let's say they made a run into the playoffs, it's going to be because Jalen Duren's going to have to be really good. And if he's that good that you're knocking off the Pacers, and then let's just say you play the Cavs to 7 games or something and lose that series. If he's that good to get you there, like if he's a primary reason, then he's probably going to be worth the money that you would have to pay him, right? If he doesn't, then you're not going to win games. And so, all right, let's get to the very end here. Just kind of looking ahead. After the Jazz game, the Detroit Pistons are 35-27. I can't say it without smiling because it's incredible. Like offensive and defensive ratings, right around, like offense 14, 15. I'm on Basketball Reference. I know their numbers are always a little different. They have it 14th, defensive rating at 9th, net at 13th, but a positive net rating for them. As things stand right now, O2, they are 6 games behind the Knicks, a half game behind the Bucks and the Pacers, 5 up on the Heat, 6 up on the Magic, and 10.5 up on the Bulls. Wes has it's either 9 or 10 quote unquote wins away from clinching at least play-in. And I know everybody wants more than play-in, but that's either Pistons wins or Bulls losses. A couple weeks from now, they could be locked into postseason play in some capacity. Just crazy the position they put themselves in here at the start of March.
Yeah. I mean, it's March 4th. We still got 6 weeks of season left. And at this point, you go if you go 12-8 down the stretch, is that possible? If you go 12-8, that's 47 wins. You go 500, that's 45 wins.
That's crazy.
Again, you're looking at win totals that are you go into the offseason and you have a whole different mindset from last year, right? Because you already have your core together, and now it's just more marginal moves. So, I mean, they put themselves in an entirely different category with this run. 10 of 11, it's 21-10, 23-10 since December 21st or something. I forget. It's so many games now. Long story short, you're looking at this next week, depending on how you do against the Warriors and the Clippers and some tough games, flirting with the 4th seed. So even in the West, they would still be firmly in the playoff mix. I know the East helps.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So 35-27. Oh yeah, they'd still be the 6th seed.
Yeah, they still yeah in the West too. So that's what's funny. Like, yeah, it's a weaker conference, but their record is legit no matter how you cut it. I mean, 8 games
Yeah,
over 500 is great.
I think the thing with the conference is like once you get into the play-in
Yeah,
situation, right? Like the Cavs and the Thunder have almost an identical record. The Celtics and the Knicks actually would be the 2 and 3 seed in the West above even the Lakers. Even the Bucks, Pacers, Pistons with their wins would be, right there. There's a little bit of a gap. But then like the Mavericks as the 10 seed are 32 and 30, where the Bulls are 24 and 37 in the East. So it's it's crazy that they're in that spot. Do we think they catch like where are we at right now with them? Do we think they catch the Bucks or the Pacers? Are we worried about the Heat or the Magic catching them from behind? I think I've kind of focused less on what's behind them than I was coming out of the All-Star break. I feel pretty confident they're going to stay in the top 6. Now I'm looking more towards like, are they going to be able to catch one of these two teams? It will be interesting. This next 3-game stretch is huge. You have these little mini stretches at LA, at Golden State, at Portland. We've mentioned that. You go like 2-1 in that O2, then you go take care of business twice against the Wizards. You go 4-1 in those 5 games, and I would guess you're sitting, as a top 4 seed after that stretch.
yeah, you get 2 of the next 3 going into back-to-back home games against the Wizards. That could absolutely do it because their schedule after that, you still have some tough games coming up. Like we said earlier, you have the Thunder twice. You got a couple against the Bucks, but really nothing else too crazy. I think really it's just this weekend is one of their last stretches where you're looking at 3 straight games that could all be somewhat tough.
Yeah. I mean, they go Thunder, then the Pelicans. Again, you don't know what that is. Miami, Dallas, like I said, with their injuries, who knows? Then you get the Pelicans again, Spurs, who know what they're playing for. So that's what gets interesting about the schedule. Sometimes I look at it and I'm like, oh, this could be really tough. And then all of a sudden you think about what teams could be doing. So best part is we're talking schedules, we're talking seeding, we're talking playoff matchups, and we have no interest in talking NBA draft because the Pistons won't be picking in the first round, and we have way more important things to talk about in the meantime anyway. So hopefully we will see continued good basketball from this team over the next 3 games, and then we will be back to talk about it after that stretch. O2, appreciate you. Everybody in the chat, thank you. Awesome chat today. Really good stuff. It's respectful. You guys bring good comments, good thoughts, good opinions. We love it. We love interacting. If you watch live, thank you so much. Hit the like, hit the share, hit the subscribe. Read Omari on the Detroit Free Press. Go subscribe to the Motor City Hoops Substack, completely free. All of the content, video breakdowns coming every once in a while. Listen to Wes and Blake on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel. The Pin Down. If you're listening after the fact, we thank you as well. Like, subscribe, share, comment, rate, review, all of that stuff. O2, take it away, my guy.
Yeah, reiterate everything Bryce said. Thank you so much for joining us. And with that, big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and big thanks to Wes Davenport, as always. And we'll talk to you all next week.